right, so my part of this session is to demo the batch upload. So there are multiple ways to upload data to CalPads. This training is focused on batch file uploads. Anyway, let's start with all of the needed documentation that you should be aware of, because the secret to CalPads is not knowing all of the information, it's just knowing where to find that information, right? So the first area to go to is the CalPads user manual. If you are in CalPads, just click on the user manual link under help, and it should bring you to the homepage of the CalPads user manual. Okay, so if you are new to CalPads and to have at least a roadmap or a list of things that you are expected to do in CalPads, I implore you to go to the Fall 1 roadmap. Okay, the Fall 1 roadmap will provide you all of the basic information relevant to the Fall 1 submission cycle. So you have here your deadline dates for each of the submissions. You also have a submission checklist, which I will be discussing in just a few minutes. This is essential in being able um, to know all of the steps and all of the specific data elements that you need to have in each of the file types, and also if you need to involve other coworkers and departments in terms of data submission, you could also use this as a sort of a race matrix, right? Then we also have the suggested milestones. We have this updated CalPads communication with all of the relevant Flash documentation for Fall 1. And then, of course, we have the changes to Fall 1. As you can see, we have all of the certification errors, or at least majority of it, will be converted to a CDD. Okay. And then below that, we have the different files that you are expected to submit. You have here the files from your SIS that you will need to extract, and you have files from your special education system that you will be pushing into CalPads through the API process. Then, of course, we break it down into each file type requirements and some processes that you need to be aware of. Example would be the SSID enrollment process requirements. So you have here the SSID match tool, you have a process, and then you have the general upload process. So majority of the time of my demo would be um, would demonstrate this process. Okay. We also have here the different SENR related topics that might be helpful for you, that and based on experience that are being asked every Fall 1 cycle. So you have here what types of enrollments for SPED students. You have here some other reminders about if you're a district of choice. You have here the TK reporting. Then, of course, you have your SINF file. All of this we will come back to this once we get into each of the file types that we need to submit. All right. And then, of course, we have some links to meetings and some additional resources. So that's just on the Fall 1 roadmap. Of course, to be able to submit files to CalPads, you need to have the roles to be able to assign the proper roles to your users. You have to know what roles to assign, obviously. So if you go to functionality map, admin, user management, and user roles, you have this list of all of the user roles that are appropriate to the type of security or organization that you've assigned to a user. Okay, so just a rule of thumb: if you have a user who will be submitting data for multiple schools within your LEA, I'd rather you create a LEA level account for them. That way they would be able to upload data for all schools rather than break it down into different schools. Okay, so just assign the user to an LEA level account rather than a school account. And then, of course, you have here all of the roles, right? We've added this additional section this year, roles to functions list. So this will provide you the list of all of the sections and functionalities in CalPads and will indicate what type of role you will need and at what level is this relevant. So take advantage of this. So right now, since we are discussing file submission, I go to file submission for me to be able to upload SENR, SINF, SELA, or any of this relevant Fall 1 data. I will need the specific file type, view, and edit roles, right? Then that goes the same for the SPED roles at the bottom, okay? Right, that's for user roles. And then going back to the CalPad user manual, you also need to be aware of the different file types, right? There are issues with your SIS files, or if you don't have an SIS and you want to create a sort of SIS system using Excel, you are able to do that by going again to Help and then clicking on Batch File Templates Download. Okay, that brings us to another section in the CalPads user manual, which is the batch file template section. So to go here, just go to Resource, Batch File Templates. Okay, or you can harness the power of search and just type, just type the keywords batch file templates, and it should bring up this section as well. So the batch file templates will allow you to be able to store all of the student records in an Excel file and then upload it to CalPads. And if you don't have any SIS or SEDS vendor, if you are a small charter school or a small elementary school or high school, and you don't have any specific SEDS or SIS vendor, you could use this instead. Okay. All right. And of course, another resource would be the reference section. The reference section will provide you the list of all of the needed documentation that you could go to and refer to in terms of the requirements and the business rules in CalPads. As you can see here, you have your CalPads error list. You have here the CalPads code sets that would provide you the list of all of the active and retired code sets in CalPads. You have here the file specifications, valid code combinations, which is useful when um, submitting corrections to to your SELA records for students, right? And then you have here the CalPads data guide as well. The CalPads data guide provides you the business rules, the context surrounding data submission to CalPads. So it provides you all of the rules, whether when to close, do you need to close a program record, or what are the circumstances why a record has to be submitted to CalPads. So all of those are in the CalPads data guide. And then, of course, you have here the CalPads SSID enrollment procedure. This is a really old document. It hasn't been updated for a while, but it still serves its purpose. It's still useful in terms of um, when dealing with enrollment anomalies and enrollment procedures. Okay, so you have, if you have issues regarding overlapping enrollments with other LEAs, there is a section for anomalies under CCE or MIDS. So you could refer to that if you have an overlapping enrollment in relation to um, discipline issues. There's also a section for that here. Okay. Then, of course, you have your reporting data for students with disabilities. It brings you to the main SPED matrix on the different scenarios. So with regards to reporting data in CalPads for SPED students. So it gives you the different grade levels, different scenarios, and who is responsible in reporting that student in CalPads. Okay. Then, of course, you have ELPAC related information. We will get to that when we go back to the Fall 1 roadmap here. Let's just go to the Fall 1 roadmap. So again, in the Fall 1 roadmap, you have your student programs, you have this language instruction program information. You also have the SELA section. When to submit a SELA record, you have a link to initial common issues when testing students. So all of these are here. We will come back to this in a few minutes. Okay. All right. So moving back here, you also have um, system documentation. It brings you to the actual direct CalPads page within on the CDE side. So you have the same information that I've shown you, except that if you want to see Flash documentation, you could go to this part. And if you also have, if there are any questions not you couldn't find in any of the documentations that I've discussed, you can always go to the FAQ page, go to you have the LCF FAQ, or go to the CalPads frequently asked questions. Make sure that you expand all. That way, if you do a search, keyword search, it you would be able to see all of those highlighted sections here. All right. So those are just some tips that I could show you right now, which will be helpful in dealing with data requirements and any errors in CalPads. Okay. And then, of course, if you want to come back to this training rate later on, to a recorded training for the academic year 24-25, you can always go to CSIS YouTube channel. Marshall, Slimon, and of course the rest of the trainers do their best to update this when the recordings are available. So you could still come back to last year's training for Fall 1 data population. So you can come back to this if you can't wait for the recording of this 24-25 training. But rest assured, all of these trainings will be in this section the end of October, I guess. All right, so let's go back to the demo, okay? So there are ways to submit records to CalPads. You have your online maintenance and your batch or mass upload. Both have its pros and cons, right? So if you have online maintenance allows you to be able to update post records for one student at a time, okay? So if you have just a handful of students, 4 students, and for some reason the file upload process in CalPads might be slow, you could go directly to online maintenance and make all of the necessary changes in CalPads. It also more often useful at the end of the submission period, when you're trying to correct certification errors, CDDs, and you don't want to introduce a big new file into CalPads. You can then just do a surgical update, meaning you can do a manual update for each of those relevant records that needs to be corrected in CalPads. So that's the value of online maintenance. This is also useful especially for SPED reporting. Sometimes, rather than submitting your entire SPED file, push your entire SPED transactions, if for some reason on your SPED education system is having issues sending the data into CalPads, you can manually post or add or edit records in CalPads for your special education file types. Just make sure that whatever you're posting directly in CalPads is already in your special education system. We want to avoid any discrepancies between those two systems, and we want to avoid legal repercussions. So another way or faster way to upload data to CalPads is by batch file upload, which I will be demoing today. So this means extracting files directly from your SIS or SEDS software and pushing the file directly to CalPads. Okay, and if you're trying to send data through SPED data through your SEDS vendor, you just create the transactions within your special education system, and then once you push those transactions, your SEDS system will interface with CalPads and that data will be sent to CalPads. And then, of course, this is a special scenario if you have students who were TBD and you were expecting the results to reflect in CalPads. All students who are considered EL or IFEP based on their scores will automatically be sent by TOMS directly to CalPad. So once a student completes four tests, all of the tests in the initial LPAC and determines the score, TOMS will automatically push the EL record, EL status, or EL or IFEP status directly to CalPads. Which is why if you still have students who you haven't tested yet or you haven't transmitted to CalPads, please do so now, because before Census Day, you only have a week left, because once the students are tested, if the if the student completes the test after Census Day, which is August 2nd, and they are considered EL or IFEP, if the status date sent back by TOMS is after Census Day, then they won't be included in your LCFF. Okay. All right. So that's the pros for mass upload. The consequence, though, is that sometimes you have to wait for CalPads to completely post the file, especially if you have hundreds of records, as well as if you're in a queue behind other LEAs as well in the system, right? Then, of course, there are rules with regards to the transaction processing for each file type. So if you have a file type that employs replacement processing, if you made a mistake of uploading a file that only contains a few students and introduce that into a school that already has, a 100 student records in CalPads, if that file type employs a replacement processing, then CalPads will overwrite whatever you currently have in the ODS. So these are some nuances that you have to be aware of when using the batch upload process. All right, so let's do the submission demonstration. So I will be uploading a blank SSID file and trying to match it to existing records in CalPad. So we will first do the SSID match tool process. And then later on, once we are certain that there are matches or there are no matches for those list of students I sent up, I will then be able to submit or request their SSIDs in CalPads and then submit all of the other requirements that has to be submitted. Okay, so the goal with submitting the SSID first is to gain ownership of the student. Okay, so right now I have here this file. So I first have my blank SSIDs. Okay, just are you guys able to see this area here? Oh. So I first have my blank SSIDs. That's step one. You're wondering how come you only have a blank SSID. So essentially, if you want to just at the start of the year, it's better to first request or extract a batch file from your SIS to see who among the students that entered your school already has a match in CalPads. Okay, so let's open the blank SSID file. So at the start of the year, you don't submit your entire file in CALPADS, entire student population first. We recommend you first submit or request SSIDs for students who do not have SSIDs in CALPADS yet, or at least in your SIS, right? So we have here 6 students that I don't have an SSID for. So, and then they have their enrollments. So more often than not, who are the students that may potentially have SSIDs already? What grade, what are the indicators that possibly students may already have a record in CalPads based on my list here. So based on the visual inspection, I would assume that students who are in 4th grade or 1st grade or probably even KN may already have existing records in CalPads, right? Because why? The student was born, I guess Sarah has a point. He was born in the US, in California, and is already in 4th grade. So there's no way this student is only entering the California system in during his 4th grade, unless, of course, he was in private school or homeschool, right? So that's one indicator. So just at the back of my mind, this might be a potential student who already have an SSID, and even Joshua 3 and possibly Pinnacles, right? So these 3 here. All right. So with that in mind, where do we upload this blank SSID file? Because there are, normally when you upload the file in CalPads, you always point you to the file upload, right? Because that's basically where we upload files in CalPads. This is normally where you upload your SSID enrollment file. However, since we're doing a SSID match process first, we go to online maintenance, student data, and go to SSID match tool. So the question is, why do we have to bother sending this to the SSID match tool? Why, right? So, I mean, we recommend that you do this to avoid possibly creating new SSIDs, multiple SSIDs for existing students in CalPads, right? So sometimes if you go directly here and you don't, because once you upload a file, an SSID enrollment file type in CalPads, and the SSID column does not have an SSID, CalPads will automatically assume that that student requires a new SSID. So it generates a new SSID. So to avoid that, we recommend you go first to the SSID match tool to be able to at least see if there are potential matches for the students in CalPads, right? So I click on choose file, and then I pick on blank SSID, okay? I open. Let's just pretend I picked it, and I open. And then, of course, you upload the file. Once you upload the file, CalPads will then process that. And then just like any SSID file, it will try if there are any issues with formatting or any issues with missing information that is required, at least at this level, it will trigger errors and will reject the file, right? However, if that file meets all of the requirements, CalPads will then push that into the system, allow it into the system, and generate potential matches. Okay. So I click on result file here once I have that match. And then normally I would have a text file. Okay. So if I click on this blank SSID, I would get this type of information. Obviously, it's not easily readable, right? And so you have to convert this in a way that would basically adjust this into the columns. Okay. There are ways to do that. There is a step in the CalPads batch file section that would allow you to do that. So we go back to help, batch file templates, and then we go down here to tips when creating batch files. Okay, so you could potentially follow this tips if you want to manually do it. So the goal is to convert that into a readable file, right? So you could follow that by following the steps here. So go into Excel, open a new Excel file, and then follow these steps. Okay, so let's just assume that I've already did that for to speed up this training. So I now have my SSID match tool results. Okay, that's number 2. So my SSID match tool results will then look like this. So I've converted that into a more readable format. And so I have here my match results. So looking at this, it seems like Joshua 3 has a single match. We have multiple matches. And then it turns out Chanel has no matches. Pinnacles has a single match. And Banff has a single match. So you have here a selection. This column here would allow it won't, this is just basically a referential file. Okay, so if your SIS is equipped to be able to automate your process by to accept whatever you indicate here, then well and good. However, this is just a reference file for you to be able to know who has an existing SSID or not, right? So we go here, and the results are this. So Redwood has potential matches. You have 81%. You have a no match for the Chanel and Chantel twins. And then you have potential matches here. So you have 100% match and 100% match here for Banff, Alberta, right? So to double check, you can just rely on these percentages. You have to go to the far right and see if that is essentially the same student. All right. So you have here Banff, Alberta. So he's from a neighboring LA, Dublin Unified, across the American Canyon. I have here his enrollment. So based on his cumulative file, it appears this is the student that this is the potential match that I have, right? And then the same thing for, who's this student? Pinnacles. Pinnacles here came from Salinas. And so this is the potential match too. Moreover, you could even scroll to the far right and see the different result information, right? So it provides you their full name, their birth date, their guardian name, right? So if and then their address. So all of this are indicated in this match tool. So rather than manually look at CalPads for each of the students, this is a way for you to be able to spot check potential matches for students. So with that in mind, I'm putting a Y here just for my reference, right? And then this one, it seems like Redwoods doesn't have a match at all. So the guy's name is Red, then Joshua Drew. So these are, wow, a miss for CalPad. So 2 out of 6, right? So I wouldn't use this, okay? So now that I've picked this 2, I then look at their SSIDs, right? The match percentage, I wouldn't rely on the match percentage. I would rely on the actual information provided for you on that area. Now, if there are missing information here of a potential of that potential match, I would, do my due diligence and copy the SSIDs and go directly to CalPads and see if that's the same student that I have, right? Because it's easier for you guys to be able to investigate now than needing to correct, mids, needing to backtrack and delete records that you have mistakenly assumed um, um, when you acquired an SSID or hijacked an SSID because you didn't do your due diligence, right? So this is that. So I pick here. I have these two SSIDs. So now what do I do? Okay. I now copy the SSIDs. I bring it into my SIS. And then I then request a new SSID batch file. Or I could just go back to my SSID batch file, the initial final blank SSIDs that I have, and then just fill this information out for those two students, right? So I have Banff and Pinnacles, have this SSID, and then now I have Joshua, Red, Chanel Islands, and Chantel with no SSID, right? So now that I have this final blank SSID, where do I upload this? I upload it directly into the file submission page, right? So I go here, file upload, I do SSID SENR, and then I pick final blank SSIDs, right? I open and then upload to CalPads, okay? Once I upload that to CalPads, it would then tell me that the upload is in process and you should have a link here that says view submission. So it brings you to the view submission page, right? So in the view submission page, it would then tell us if we have any potential errors based on the file that we submitted or if the records have been posted. So let me just go here. So we have file 3, right? Final file. So we go here and we have the blank SSIDs. Okay. That's our final blank SSIDs file. So potentially we have uploaded the file. And so now, okay, I have my blank SSIDs, right? It posted. So I would expect as a user to see the list of SSIDs here, right? But lo and behold, CalPads, sometimes makes it more difficult for you to be able to do your work, right? Logically, but it wouldn't tell us or tell you what the SSIDs are for the students, right? So you have 6 here. So what is the next step in the request process? If there are no, if the SSIDs are not posted here, what do we do next? Of course, obviously, you have to search for those students now. CalPad says it's posted, then where should I search? If you want to do a manual search, you could do that by going to online maintenance, student data, and then going to search by enrollment and picking the school that you uploaded for. So let's say, since my file only involved SSID training Emerson, I'm picking that, and then I'm picking currently enrolled, and then I click on search. I should be able to see those students here. So I have, there you go, Chantel, I have Redwood, I had Banff, who else did we? I have Chantel and Pinnacles. So essentially, we were able to post those records. So if you have a handful of students, you can just copy the SSIDs or copy the SSIDs and then manually add it into your SIS if you only have a handful of students, right? But since we're doing batch upload, what would be the more logical batch process to do here? The next step is, of course, requesting an SSID extract, right? SSID extract. To do that, the SSID extract would allow you to be able to request all of your SSIDs, all of your enrolled students in a certain period of time. So it would generate the SSID extract. However, before I do that, I forgot. Before requesting an SSID extract, for those veteran users, what would be the next step once you upload the file into CalPads and do the SSID extract? Since you've been burned by this process a lot, what would be your next step here? For me, I would go to online maintenance, anomalies management, and see if I have any MIDs, if I unintentionally created SSIDs, right? Okay, click on apply filter, and I don't have any MIDs. Why? Because theoretically, I did my due diligence, right? I double checked if those students were in the SSID match. I even looked at the CalPads ODS manually to see if there are any students that match my student. So this is the reason why you have to go through the SSID match tool, especially if you have hundreds of students with no SSIDs, to avoid going here and fixing mids. Because, I've helped a lot of my LAs who got burned having to fix mids, having to backtrack and not, because sometimes my LAs would accidentally acquire an SSID that shouldn't be the SSID associated with their student. So there could be the actual student owning that SSID might have already a SELA record. That student might be an EL. That student might be already be an RFEP. And what happens? You inherit all of those statuses, right? And so it's important that you first do the SSID match tool before before uploading a blank SSID file in CalPads. So since we don't have any MIDs, we can now go and request the SSID extract, because there's no point requesting an SSID extract and uploading into CalPads if you have MIDs here. Okay, if you've unintentionally hijacked an SSID, then of course you shouldn't be introducing that in your SINF or SPRG records in your system, right? So let's go to extracts here and go to SSID extract. This is where we download our SSID extract. When I tell LEAs to download the SSID extract, you could potentially pick date range by SSID created date and pick that date if you're sure when those SSID were requested, or go to date range instead, which I highly recommend. Pick the school that you've generated the SSID extract for. If you have multiple schools in the file, pick all. Pick the enrollment start date. Maybe just pick the earliest enrollment start date for your school this year, August 1st. Pick today's date for enrollment date. And then click on request file. Okay. Once you request file, the reason why you should do that is it includes all of your students that has an SSID in CalPads based on this enrollment start date. So you say, hey, that sounds familiar. Isn't that the SSID enrollment ODS file? Yeah, sort of, but then again, this has a different use, right? Because the SSID enrollment ODS extract only extracts all of your SSID enrollment data elements. This file here provides you more information that includes some data elements for other file types that the student may already have in CalPads that you might use to introduce in your SIS. Okay, if I click on request file, we go back to here. So I click on request file, right? And then once the request is done, I would download my file here. Okay, so I have here SSID Extract. If I click on download, it should bring up the file here, right? How often do you guys encourage CalPads to hurry up? There you go. So if I open the SSID Extract directly from my download page, that extract will look like this. So again, I have the information here. However, it doesn't appear to be readable, right? I couldn't figure out what are these data elements and what does this represent, right? So again, we go back to the conversion of this file into Excel, right? So we go back to the batch file template section and convert this into Excel. You can either use this, or better yet, since I downloaded an SSID extract, there is already a extract template that you could use to automatically format that file. Okay, if I download this, it will look like this. So we have here your SSID extract template. So the SSID extract template provides the necessary column headers for each of those file types. So why is this useful when acquiring SSIDs for incoming students? It's useful because it, aside from the information that you already have up to here, right? You also have any potential available ELAS record of the student, their language and status date. You also have the SSID create date. You also have a column to indicate if the student is SPED or not. And then, of course, you have your initial US enrollment dates, which is useful for students who are EL, and you need to fill this out in your SINF file. To automate the process of importing the file in CalPads, you just click on import file, and CalPads will then this template will automatically fill out the information that we need. Okay, so let's do that. So we now have this. Once you import it, you now have this. It will automatically generate the records from that SSID extract. Okay. So your question is, how come you only have this records here? How come you only have 6 if your school has more students? That's because I haven't introduced the majority of my students who are returning to CalPads yet, right? So this is just for those students who have been enrolled in CalPads because they have blank SSIDs. Okay, so I have here one student, Banff, already has an existing record in CalPads. So you have here the student as English, the student is EO, the acquisition date, the language, and then the SSID create date, and then of course the enrollment start date. Okay, you can use this just to see if just to have an be able to see how, be able to read the file, right? But if you are confident with all of the SSID extracts that CalPads generated, you can directly import that SSID extract file directly into your SIS, and your SIS will then pick up all of those necessary elements and put it in the corresponding file types, which is the SINF, the SELA. It would also warn you if a student who is incoming is SPED. That way you can then tell your SPED folks to then check their SED side and see if they would be able to create transactions for students and possible assessments too, right? So that's the use of the SSID extract. So you import that SSID extract into your SINF file, into your SIS, which in turn the SIS will then pick all of those data, right? So now that we've imported the students in my SIS, they already have um, the files in CalPads, the enrollment information. Do we now go ahead and submit the next files? Yes, possibly yes, you could do that. Or to save you time from, sending up multiple files for different sets of students, I would then just extract the SINF file for the rest of my student population as well, right? So before you do that though, you first have to make sure that you submit your enrollment this year, right? For those incoming students. So let's go back here. So now I've extracted the file. Let's go back to my folder. So I have the SSID extract template. I introduced this into my system. So now, do we skip SENR returning students? Possibly, if you just want to submit the rest of the files for those students with blank SSIDs, you could do that. However, for the sake of efficiency, I would then submit my SENR for returning students, right? Because what happens if I directly submit an SINF and unintentionally extracted all of the SINF for all of our students for that school? What happens if I submit an SINF, a SELA, and SPRG if the students don't have an active enrollment this year? That's correct. You have a ownership issue. So let me just show you that example here. So I uploaded my SINF ahead of submitting um, my demo records, right? So I have here SINF demo 2425. So I submitted this in CalPads. Okay, I got GERR ones. So of course I had missing SSID values because I submitted a file with no SSIDs, right? So that's one example. Another one is this part here. Yeah, here. GERR05. LAs does not have ownership of student enrollment to make the update. So I have here the SINF file that I have included all of my students who are expected or who are already in attendance this year. However, since I did not submit their enrollment file yet, I get a GERR5, which is the ownership issue. Okay. So I click on view, and then of course, I I have Josefa Rizal. I have all of these students here. Okay. So it's important to make sure that you import first your SENR file before introducing your SINF. So that's what I did here. So what do we do next? We then upload your SENR file for your returning students. Okay. Upload it here to CalPads. Again, view submissions, file upload. We pick that file. And then just the same, we use the SSID enrollment. Okay. So I pick this SENR returning students, open, and then upload. Once I upload that, of course, it would tell me or bring me to the view submission section, right? So once we go to view submissions, Let's see here. So I get a GERR5, right? And so now, by the way, how did I know that I had to submit my SENR first? Of course, you click on the error name, which is the GERR5. This GERR5 will bring you to the specific error section in the error list, right? So specific to that file type. So you have here the file that you uploaded, SINF. I get a GERR5. What does it say? The student's SINF effective start date or end date range does not align with the LEA's enrollment. Okay. Suggested resolution. Make sure that the effective date range is within the enrollment period. Make sure that you compare the enrollment history. So if there's no enrollment, then of course you can own that student. Okay. So that's, a summary of GERR5. But then I just wanted to show you the process of how to check the errors. Okay. Let's go back here. So we've assumed that we need to submit our enrollment. And so now we go back here and we've submitted our returning students. So fortunately, our SENR file posted with no rejected records. So now we can move on and submit our SINF, right? Which I did. And now, again, fortunately, I was able to upload all of the records of those students in CALPADS. However, before we move on to the next file type, I just wanted to show you some data elements you need to be aware of. You need to make sure are populated in CALPADS for the SINF file. Let's open this. So how do we know what data elements or columns are required in CALPADS? Again, we go back to the reference section of CALPADS and download the CALPADS file specifications form. So we go back here to CALPADS, go to resources, and the reference document that would let us know what records are required or data elements are required is the CALPADS file specifications form. So I download this, bring it up here. Okay. And I go to student information. Then I would then filter for required, right? Or, I would just go here to the required section and see if each column that is identified in my SID is correct. So just a reference for you guys. So these columns here correspond to each of the columns in the CFS. Notice that in the CFS, we have numbers, right? We have here 2. 2 means this is the second file relevant to your submission. Then 01 would be the field element or column in that file type. Okay, so you have your record type, record transaction, local record ID, effective start date, effective end dates, and that corresponds to this section here. All right, so you have your 201, it corresponds to each column. Okay, so looking at this, there are columns that are required during upload. There are columns that will not trigger an issue when you first upload the file into CALPADS, but it will trigger CDDs and DDs down the road. Okay, so just a reminder, this is important. Effective start date, of course, the school of attendance and the academic year. And then, of course, you need to have the SSID, right? Then the information of the name, make sure you have your birth dates. And then All of this information here, the race code and ethnicity, if this is blank right now, CalPAS will not trigger an upload error for you. However, it is important that you have the information ready because it's difficult to come back later on and resolve issues regarding missing race and ethnicity or missing parent guardian ed level information, or if you have a student who is an EL down the road, you have your enrollment in US years indicator is required too. So here's a tip, okay? Column 1, effective start date. If you are introducing the SINF at the start of the year, always make sure that the effective start date matches the enrollment start date. There shouldn't be any gap, okay? If the student started on August 12, by all means, your effective start date should be in August 12. If you have a new student that you've generated an SSID for, we have Chantel here, and the effective start date is after the enrollment start date, what happens? You will have a gap. You will have, CalPAS will then introduce a new SINF record, because what happens is that if you have students who are new in CalPADS, when you upload your SENR file, CalPADS will only create a shell SINF record in CalPADS. So let's look at this student. Okay, sorry to go into all of this details, but I just feel it's important for you guys to know the effect of making sure the students are in the right thing. So once you upload a SINF file or SENR, initially CalPADS will create a shell record here based on just the information that was associated to the SENR file. If you haven't submitted an SINF file yet, all of these elements will be blank. So what happens, CalPADS will then trigger a race and ethnicity missing indicators down the road for you. Now, if you extracted an SINF file that has a different effective start date as this, CalPADS will just create a new line here with all of your correct information. So let's say it's today. So it's 9/26. CalPADS will have an effective start date of 9/26. You also have a record here, which represents this record with all of the missing information. So that would be problematic down the road. So always make sure that your effective start date is always matching your enrollment start date if you're just submitting SINF files at the start of the year. Okay. All right. So going back to this, also make sure that you also have your race and ethnicity populated now. And then, of course, you have your residential address. And then this part here, initial US enrollment K-12. If you have a student that has a SELA record of TBD that is new to CalPADS, I'd rather you make sure that you populate the initial US enrollment date on the SINF file, because you never know if the student is either EL or IFEP, right? Because once this is EL, CalPADS will automatically generate a new error down the road for you. You don't want to do that. So to anticipate that, or if you have students who you know are TBD or who know are EL, always make sure that this column is populated before you introduce this file into CalPADS. Another thing, if you have a student who is born outside of the US, so if you have someone who is born outside of the US based on the birth city or birth country, like this guy here, Roy. So he was born in Argentina, right? So if the student is born in Argentina, this will always be required. The enrolled in US school less than 3 years cumulative indicator. So always make sure that if you have a foreign-born student based on their birth country, this should always be populated. Because again, you'll get an error down the road, which is, I believe, was it CERT 113? I am, yeah. So then, of course, you have your parent guardian ed level. Again, this will trigger if down the road for you as a CDD if you don't have this populated at the start of the year. Okay, so those are the elements that normally LAs get tripped up or encounter that slows down your upload to CalPads. Okay, so once we've uploaded the SINF, the student now has the demographic information. I also have here the race code indicators. Okay, so I have that here. And then, of course, now we go to the SELA. Okay, so now I have the student TBD. Why? Because I've already uploaded this file. Okay, I have already uploaded the SELA file. The SELA file, yeah, let's go back here. So the next file would be the SELA demo file. So I have here all of my students in my school with their corresponding SELA status. If I upload this to CalPads, will there be any repercussions? If I upload all of my SELA records to CalPads, will there be repercussions? Okay, the answer is yes. Okay, why? Because CalPads only wants you to submit SELA records for students who do not have a SELA status or the SELA status is different from the existing record in CalPads. Okay, so how do I know that? Again, let's go back to the reporting roadmap because that information is in the roadmap. Okay, let's go back to the roadmap here. When to submit a SELA record, right? So if I go to this link here or I just go to the SELA file, okay, it brings me to this section. So when to submit a SELA record? You only submit a SELA record upon enrollment of a new student with brand new SSID or when a student has a valid change in their ELAS. So let's say if a student was EO and it turns out the student needs to be tested as TBD, then submit a TBD record, of course, with a correction status, right? And then of course, if let's say a student was tested later on in spring during the summative testing and the student then turns out to be fluent, you now submit a SELA status of RFEP during the spring season. So again, it boils down to only submitting SELA status records for those that need an update or need to be reported first time in CalPads. Okay, so with that, I upload this, and then of course I would trigger an error if I introduce all of these students. So let's go back to my view submissions. I try to upload this. See how I have here, I uploaded my SELA file. Of course, how do you upload the SELA? Go here to SSID Enrollment, go to SELA, pick the file, and then upload. Once you upload that, you go back here, and it would then generate the status, right? So initially, when I uploaded my file, I had 0 passing records. So everything was rejected. I checked my SELA file and say, why? Okay. Initially, I have a GERR7, I have a GERR2, and I have an invalid academic year. So looking at this, I unintentionally had a typo on the file. So the file had academic year 24, but then the academic year second one is 24-24. So that's not a valid code, right? Because there should be 24, and then 2025. So that's what the error. How do I know that? I click on view, and then of course I look at that error. Now, if I click on GERR2, again, this will lead me to the CALPADS user manual. So GERR2 for the SELA will then show me the different field elements I have to look at, right? So here, it's invalid, and then of course I have my invalid academic year. So I click on IVR6, and it says here, academic year ID must be valid academic school year and not more than 1 year in the future. So then I click on GERR7, code submitted outside of the effective date range. Okay, what did I submit here that triggered a GERR7? Ah, so when I uploaded my file, it says here, based on this error, primary language value span. Okay, I click on this. I have span, right? I have TBD. Why is this triggering an error? Again, you would think, okay, value found not found in reference set. So again, I go back to the error, GERR7. It says here, this code is not effective in the current academic year or date range. So I scroll down and I see a suggested resolution. Look at the CALPADS code sets and see why the indicated language is incorrect. So I go to my CALPADS code sets. I filter for language, but first I have to filter for end date here. I should only see active records this year, right? So it's all NA. Then I go to language. Okay. Or since I have that code indicated here in the error, it says span. So I directly filter for span rather than language, right? So, but then we already have this. So it turns out language for Spanish should be Spanish, SPA, instead of span. So that was my issue. So what do? I go directly to my SIS and change it. If all of my students, Spanish students, have that issue, then it's a code mapping issue in your SIS, right? Now, if just a select few, then it could have been just a typo, right? Or if you don't have an SIS and you only rely on your spreadsheet, then of course you have to go directly to the spreadsheet and correct those, right? So let's go back here to my SELA file, and I went ahead and changed span into SPA, okay? Then we have Filipino, we have English, okay? So I've corrected that and uploaded to CALPADS, right? So now I got a rejection again. So I looked at my file, and that's when I get the ELAS start date already exists for student, okay? So why did this happen? So this happened for my student, Banff, Alberta. Why? Because when I uploaded the file, the student already has the same status in CalPads with the same status date. Because why? We inherited this from the prior LEA. How did we do that? Because we extracted the SSID extract and introduced it into our system, right? And so now we have this, and because we have the rule of not reporting a SELA status for a student who already has an existing record, this issue triggered. So Just remember, you only submit SELA status files for students who either needs an update to their status or they don't have any status yet in CALPADS. Okay, so if I click on the error description, that is what it would say. A student must not have more than one SELA record with the same ELAS start date and status date. Okay, so that's the issue here. All right, so again, I went back to my file and fixed it and then uploaded it back to CALPADS, right? So now that I've uploaded the file, that file posted for all my students, 11 students. Okay. So now we then go back to our file and go to our last file, at least from the SIS side. We have our SPRG demo file. So we have here all of the SPRG eligibilities of the students this year, right? So we have here students with program 181, which is free lunch, 182 reduced lunch, 191, which is homeless, 181, which is again free lunch, and 192, which is military. Okay. How do I know this? Again, all of that information is in the CALPADS code sets. The CALPADS code sets, if you filter for programs, pick education program, we have all of the active codes here. Okay. So 191 is homeless, 192 is armed forces family, 181 is free meal, 182 is reduced meal. Okay. And then of course we have our LIP records. When do you submit LIP records to CALPADS? So again, the LIP records are reliant on your SELA status. So the answer is, we could go back to the CALPADS user manual, right? Go to our roadmap and click on the SPRG file. So we have here different information on the SPRG. So you have here all of the data collected for Fall 1. You have here for end of year. And then you have some nuances that we have to be aware of regarding submitting program 181 and 182. Then we have your LIP program start dates. So again, you may submit LIP program records for students who are in a class that has, bilingual instruction services, or anyone who is in that class. Is it limited to just EL students? No, the answer is no. However, there are specific LIP codes that are specific to EL students. So if let's say you have a student that is EO, but is in a school that provides dual language immersion. Do you report them? Yes. However, it's optional, but then you may report them as receiving dual language or doing development bilingual. So the only records that are specific to EL is, oh, actually this one, 300, 303, here we go, 307, okay? So you have here just records applicable to EL students. So 307, 305, and 303. And 300, actually there's 4. So any other student with other statuses may be reported with any of these records, 301, 302, 304. Now the question is, what if the student is RFEP down the road? Now, if that's the case, you have to close out the program the day before the student became RFEP. So that's something that you have to do in end of year, which may be discussed during the end of year training. Okay. All right. So what is the language instructional program for? It's basically a way for you to tell us what type of instructional strategy for EL are you providing for students who are who need EL services. Okay, so that's part of that. So going back to this file, you have here the nuances for your NSLP2. So it says here, if a student was enrolled in the prior academic year and was eligible for free lunch 181, 182 based on their income form, are you going to report their eligibility right away at the start of the year? So let's say if they were eligible last year and you sent them a income verification form again this year, assuming your school is not a CEP or Provision 2-3 school, do you then automatically mark their program start date for a program 181 at the first day of school? The answer is no. So normally, the students who are eligible from last year's income form may benefit for the first 30 days of free lunch, right? However, it is still your responsibility to send them the form and verify if they are still eligible this year. Do not send a program 181 by virtue of last year's benefit. Okay? Otherwise, if you do that, you have a program 181 with a start date of August 12, and then after you receive their income form and they still qualify, you now are trying to introduce a SPRG record with a different program start date, you will get a SPRG error for that. And then, of course, make sure that any application would have a start date before 10/31, okay, based on the stamp date you received the application. Okay. Now, for students who are in Provision 2 and 3 schools or CEP, you have to submit their program 181 or 182 every year. However, you don't have to have them fill out an income eligibility form every year, especially during their 3-year or 4-year period. You only request that form to be filled out during their base year, and whatever their status was in the base year, that's what you carry over in the next academic years, if they are still enrolled at that school. Okay. All right. So with that information, we have all of these students here. So I have here students with the 812 enrollment, which is the first day of school. Why? Because these are returning students and they qualified from last year's or my school is in the CEP is a CEP school. So some of these already qualified during the base year. So I am just carrying over the program started from last year. However, again, if you are not a Provision 2-3 school, then of course you have to fill out the form every year, and the membership start date would be based on when that form was received and date stamped for students whose eligibility was approved. Okay. For the homeless, you have to identify when the homeless was identified. Okay, so if you have a student who is returning, who is still homeless since last year, then you continue to just keep that homeless record open. You don't have to resubmit a new one this year. And then for military service, if you have a student who is new this year, the program membership start date could be the date when the student's family member who is in the military became started their service, right? So if the parent was in the armed forces way before the student was born, then use the student's birth date. Otherwise, you report the date when the parent was activated in the armed forces. So we have that, and so now we upload the file again to CALPADS. We did our due diligence with the start dates and the qualifications, and so now we were able to post the records directly into the system with no complications, right? There you go. So now we've made sure that we gain ownership of the student by submitting the SSID enrollment file, but that process required multiple steps. If I've acquired a new student in CALPADS, then we've submitted their SINF, their SELA, and their SPRG. Now, for any student who were identified as SPED, you have to coordinate with your SPED coordinator in terms of the data that would be submitted to CALPADS. So again, I think I hinted on the submission checklist. Skip that. So we have our submission checklist here. So this one is a way for you to be able to coordinate the data collection with other departments, right? So you could send them this file, have them then indicate the different departments who are responsible for each file type. And then you could also identify when the submission was complete, okay? So in a way, this is a way for you to be able to manage the submission of the data, manage timelines and expectations for your coworkers, right? So the submission checklist provides you all of the information that I've discussed, any potential errors that might trigger if you miss those information. And then you also have here all of the information for SPED. You have here a reminder of the data discrepancy. So after you've uploaded all of your 4 files in CALPADS or even your SPED files, you don't go directly to the certification page to check and look at your reports. You first have to look if you have any potential data discrepancy errors before even going into your reports. Okay, so we have here all of the reports that you are expected to review, which we normally would discuss in the reports and certification process. Each report here in the quality check, this is where this section here provides you things that you need to spot, things that you need to verify for each of those students. If you want to review 1.1, then there are specific information you need to look at, who is being collected, why is your student not included on 1.17 compared to 1.1. So all of those may also be listed here. However, if you want to get a full specifications of each report, just copy this and go to that URL. Or better yet, this information here is sitting in the user manual. So you just go to the CALPADS user manual and go to reporting roadmap, go to snapshots ODS, and you have all of your reports here. Okay, but that's for a different training session, a different day. My concern is if you've posted all of your records in CALPADS, by all means, go to data discrepancy and see if you have potential errors that might come up in your Fall 1 certification. Okay. So in here, you will see potential errors that you would probably get. So in your certification process, right? So it's better to fix that now before being bogged down during the certification process. Okay. All right. So that is the end of our demo. Again, the secret to CALPADS for everyone is to know where to locate documentation, harness the power of Google search too, because that's how we answer questions that are not in the user manual, that are not in documentation. Sometimes I would just Google keywords based on the questions that you guys sent me, and you'd be surprised what Google could provide you in with regards to documentation. If there are any questions related to my demo, we can pass the mic back to Matt so he can take us home.